The Galactic Council had never declared war before. For over 10,000 years, it had acted as a governing body, an enforcer of treaties and arbitrator of disputes. It had punished rogue civilizations, sanctioned aggressive warlords, and even dismantled entire empires that threatened galactic order. But outright war? Never. That was until humanity. The declaration came without ceremony. A single transmission was sent across every major galactic network, broadcasted to all spacefaring civilizations. The screen flickered on, revealing the Council's high speaker, his expression severe, his voice laced with cold authority. 4 repeated violations of interstellar law, for the destabilization of countless economies, for unchecked expansion and disregard for the Council's governance. Humanity is hereby designated as a hostile force. As of this moment, the full might of the Galactic Council is mobilized against the Terran Alliance. Our war fleets will march. Our justice will be swift. This is your final warning. Surrender, or be annihilated. The message repeated every hour for an entire day. It played on every planetary network, across every colony and trade hub, in every language known to the galaxy. Every empire, every race held their breath. This was the moment the Council had finally put an end to the problem. The moment humanity, after centuries of defiance, would be forced to kneel. But there was one problem. Humanity didn't seem to care. The Council's miscalculation. The war declaration reached Terra Prime at exactly 6 o'clock Galactic Standard Time. By 6:03, the Terran government had issued its official response. Acknowledged? That was it. No desperate counter-proposal. No frantic peace talks. Not even an attempt to rally their allies. Just one word. At first, the Council believed this was a bluff, a show of false confidence meant to keep their people from panicking. Surely humanity must understand what was coming. The largest military coalition in galactic history was preparing for war. Hundreds of thousands of warships. Entire fleets of planet crackers, siege dreadnoughts, and atmospheric assault carriers. Every empire that had ever feared humanity's rise had rushed to pledge their forces. By sheer numbers alone, the Terran military was outmatched 500 to 1. There was no possible way for humanity to win. And yet, they weren't preparing for war. There were no military movements. No fleet deployments. No emergency draft orders. Instead, life in the Terran Alliance continued as usual. Factories did not switch to wartime production. Fleets did not mobilize. Colonists went to work as if nothing had changed. It was as if humanity hadn't even noticed that the largest war in galactic history was about to begin. The Council's growing unease. 2 weeks passed. The war declaration had been sent. The fleets had gathered. The entire galactic economy had shifted into wartime production. And still, humanity did nothing. The Council was confused. Then they were irritated. Then they were worried. An emergency meeting was held aboard High Citadel Prime, the seat of the Council's power. The most powerful beings in the galaxy, leaders of entire star-spanning civilizations, gathered in a chamber of glass and gold to discuss a single species that refused to take them seriously. Do they not understand the gravity of this war? High Speaker Varquin of the Ketheri Dominion snarled, his mandibles twitching in frustration. They think they are untouchable, hissed Admiral Teleth of the Solvari Consortium. Their arrogance will be their undoing. Then why have they not fortified their systems? Grand Marshal Gorlon of the Threx Imperium rumbled, his armored claws scraping against the table. They act as if this is beneath them. Silence. Because that was what unsettled them most. Humanity wasn't responding like a species about to be conquered. They were acting like a species that didn't consider this a war at all. The first strike, and the first mistake. The Council, frustrated with humanity's lack of reaction, decided to strike first. The Fleet of Judgment, an armada of over 80,000 warships, was sent to seize Outpost Epsilon, a minor Terran colony near the border. It was the perfect target. Strategically insignificant. Lightly defended. A show of force that would break humanity's delusions of invulnerability. They expected a quick surrender. They expected the Terran government to finally panic. They expected humanity to finally act like every other species had before them, like a cornered animal scrambling to survive. What they did not expect was what happened next. The moment the Council learned fear. The Fleet of Judgment arrived at Outpost Epsilon and immediately surrounded the planet. Admiral Roval of the Ketheri Dominion, commander of the fleet, sent the standard ultimatum. Surrender the colony immediately. You are now under the jurisdiction of the Galactic Council. There was no response. After 2 hours of silence, Roval ordered an orbital bombardment. A warning shot. The first salvo struck the outer colonies, devastating the landscape. Terran cities burned. Still, no response. Then, after 4 hours, the colony governor finally answered. The screen flickered to life. A human woman appeared. Middle-aged. Unarmed. Not a military officer, just a colonial administrator. And she was bored. Oh, right. The whole war thing. Almost forgot about that. She took a sip of coffee. Look, I've got a long day ahead of me. Are we doing this now or? The alien commander stared in stunned silence. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even angry. She was annoyed. Admiral Roval, struggling to keep his composure, snarled. This is not a negotiation. This is your surrender. The woman sighed. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Then, with a completely disinterested voice, she asked. All right. Quick question before I waste my time. Are you sure you brought enough ships? Roval sneered. We have 80,000 warships. Your fleet is non-existent. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. The woman tilted her head and smirked. Oh, honey, that's adorable. And then the censor screamed. Because at that moment, the entire Galactic fleet realized something horrifying. The sky behind them had changed. Something had arrived. Something big. Something that made 80,000 warships look like insects in the dark. And for the first time since this war had begun, the Galactic Council felt fear. Admiral Roval had never felt fear like this before. For centuries, he had led fleets that brought entire civilizations to their knees. He had shattered empires, crushed rebellions, and enforced the Council's will across the stars. And yet, as he stood on the command deck of his dreadnought, staring at the horizon of absolute darkness behind his fleet, he felt it. Terror. Something had arrived. Something bigger than their fleet. Something that had been waiting. The alarms blared across every Council warship. Thousands of sensor feeds flickered with error warnings. The stars behind them, blotted out. Then the scans finally adjusted. And the reality of what they were facing sank in. The arrival of the Silent Fleet. A Terran fleet had appeared out of nowhere. Not just a fleet. A wall of warships stretching across the system in perfect formation, like a midnight tidal wave swallowing the void. The numbers came in. And Admiral Roval's blood ran cold. They weren't outnumbering humanity. Humanity was outnumbering them. The Council's 80,000 ships? Terran fleet count, 620,000. It was impossible. It was insane. The Terran Alliance was supposed to be a minor power, a species that was still finding its place in the galaxy. How had they built this? The bridge officers screamed for orders. Admiral, they're hailing us. Roval clenched his mandibles. A surrender? No, impossible. Humanity would demand a fight. He turned to the display. The human woman was still there, the same colony administrator from Outpost Epsilon. She hadn't moved. She hadn't blinked. She just looked bored. So, she yawned. Are you done wasting my time yet? Roval's vision blurred with rage. You dare? She cut him off. Cool. So, quick status update for you. She gestured lazily behind her. That thing you're looking at? That's just our border defense fleet. You know, the guys who handle minor problems? Border defense fleet. Roval's heart stopped. This wasn't humanity's full strength. This wasn't their armada. This was their perimeter guard. The first strike, and the last mistake. The Council fleet panicked. Some commanders, out of sheer survival instinct, ordered a retreat. Others, blinded by arrogance, opened fire. Massive plasma lances surged across the void, impacting the leading edge of the Terran fleet. The first barrage should have crippled entire dreadnoughts. It did nothing. Not a single Terran warship took damage. The energy dissipated. Absorbed. Redirected. Then the Terran fleet responded. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't send boarding parties. They simply activated something. A pulse rippled through space. The bridge lights flickered. And suddenly, every single Council warship went dark. No weapons. No shields. No engines. Nothing. The absolute power of indifference. Roval's dreadnought drifted helplessly. The once mighty fleet of Judgment, the largest war force ever assembled against humanity, was now nothing more than floating wreckage. The human woman on the screen tilted her head. Oh, right. I forgot to tell you. She smiled. We cracked your entire weapons system 3 decades ago. Silence. A cold, choking, terrifying silence. They had never stood a chance. Humanity had let them declare war. Humanity had let them gather their fleets. Humanity had let them believe they were in control. And then, at the last possible moment, they had revealed the truth. This war was never real. The Council had thought they were teaching humanity a lesson. But all along, humanity had just been waiting for an excuse. The Council begs for mercy. The panic spread across the entire Council fleet. Commanders screamed over emergency channels, demanding negotiations, pleading for terms. The human woman sighed again. Look, I don't really care what you do at this point. She tapped something off-screen. Your ships will have power again in, let's say 5 minutes? Call it a lesson in humility. Roval's breath caught in his throat. They were letting them go? Just like that? Then the human woman leaned forward. And for the first time her expression changed. The boredom was gone. Her gaze was cold. Don't mistake this for mercy. She paused. Then, in a voice that sent a chill through every living being on the Council fleet, she said, "This war is already over. It ended the second you started it." Then the transmission cut out. And just like that, the Terran fleet vanished. Not a single warp signature. Not a trace left behind. One moment they had been surrounded by an unstoppable armada. The next, nothing. As if it had never been there at all. The Council's collapse. When the Council fleet finally regained power, they did not attempt another attack. They did not declare a counteroffensive. They did not mobilize reinforcements. Instead, the largest military force in history fled. They ran without looking back. Because they finally understood. Humanity was not a species that could be conquered. They were not a species that could be bullied. And if the Council ever tried this again, there would be no warnings. No power restoration. No survivors. The last message. 3 days later, a final transmission was sent from Terra Prime. It was one sentence. It was sent once. No repeats. No threats. Just a simple statement. We don't care about your war. But try this again and we'll make sure you never get another chance. The message ended. The war was over. Because for the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, they had finally encountered something beyond their control. And humanity had simply stopped caring. The Council had never lost a war before. Until now. They had not just been defeated, they had been dismissed. Humiliated. Humanity had crushed their fleets without firing a shot and then vanished, leaving only a single warning. Try this again and we'll make sure you never get another chance. For the first time in history the Galactic Council was afraid. But not everyone had learned their lesson. Some species had already begun to fracture, seeking their own survival. Some tried to sue for peace, offering apologies and diplomatic concessions. Others wanted revenge. And one race, one desperate empire, was about to push too far. The fractured Council. The Council had been the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy. It had overseen thousands of civilizations, enforced laws, maintained trade and prevented wars. But now it was shattering from within. The Kethari Dominion, one of the Council's founding members, had already withdrawn. The Solvari Consortium, still reeling from their fleet's destruction, had officially cut ties. The Threx Imperium, once the Council's strongest military ally, was in civil war. Its ruling houses split between those who wanted peace and those who wanted vengeance. The Council had spent millennia wielding fear as a weapon. Now, they were the ones afraid. And fear makes people do stupid things. The empire that refused to learn. The Dralzeth Empire had always been aggressive, expansionist and ruthless. They had built their power on brute force, conquering weaker species, forcing submission through sheer military dominance. And now, they refused to believe humanity had truly won. Their bluffing, High Warlord Vraxal snarled before the Dralzeth High Command. They have technology, yes, but they lack conviction. They lack the will to use it. The other Dralzeth generals hesitated. They disabled an entire fleet, one of them reminded him. With nothing but an energy pulse. They could have killed us all. Vraxal bared his teeth. And yet, they didn't. His voice dripped with arrogance. Because they fear escalation. They fear total war. Which means, he leaned forward, eyes burning with confidence. We still have time to strike first? The room was silent. Then one by one the generals nodded. They had built an empire on breaking lesser species. To them humanity was no different. And so they made their choice. They would strike. They would push humanity until they finally fought back. And they would force humanity to kneel. The mistake that ended a species. 1 week later, the Dralzeth fleet launched a direct assault on a human colony. Unlike the failed attack on Outpost Epsilon, this was not a warning shot. This was extermination. They hit New Avalon, one of humanity's most prosperous outer worlds. A planet of 12 billion people. The Dralzeth fleet didn't just bombard military targets. They didn't just destroy defenses. They glassed entire cities, burned forests to ash, vaporized oceans. They made sure there were no survivors. And when the final transmission from New Avalon was intercepted by the rest of the galaxy, it wasn't a distress call. It wasn't begging for help. It was one single word broadcasted across every network. A message from a dying world. A warning. Noted. The galactic reaction. The Council watched in horror. The surviving empires froze. The races that had begun apologizing to humanity now abandoned the Council entirely, fleeing to the edges of the galaxy, desperate to avoid what was coming. Because everyone knew. Everyone understood. The moment humanity truly cared, the moment they finally decided to fight back, it was over. The sky cracks open. It happened 48 hours later. The Dralzeth homeworld, Zalkair, was the most fortified planet in the Empire. It was surrounded by 10 planetary shields. Hundreds of dreadnoughts patrolled its orbit. Millions of troops stood ready for an invasion. They had been preparing for war. And they thought they were ready. They were not. It began with a sound. A low hum vibrating through space. Something massive was coming. Then, for the second time in history, the stars vanished. And the sky cracked open. The end of the Dralzeth Empire. A human fleet appeared over Zalkair. Not a fleet. A storm. It made the silent fleet that had humbled the Council look small. A fleet so large, so vast, that it blotted out the entire sky. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that not a single human warship fired a shot. Instead, they simply pointed. And something else emerged. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a weapon. It was something bigger than any planetary system, something that ignored the laws of physics. It hovered above Zalkair, casting a shadow that covered the entire planet. Then the world itself began to dissolve. No explosions. No warheads. No orbital bombardments. The planet itself was simply unmade. The entire Dralzeth species screamed. Then they were gone. As if they had never existed. The message that broke the galaxy. Then humanity spoke one last time. A message was sent not just to the Council but to every living race. A simple statement of fact. This war is over. There will be no negotiations. No treaties. No surrenders. You do not get to attack us and survive. We will not rule you. We will not govern you. We do not care what happens to you. But let this be your first and final lesson. Do not. Then the Terran fleet vanished. The Dralzeth were erased from history. And the rest of the galaxy? They finally understood. The new galactic order. The Council was no more. The surviving empires never spoke of war against humanity again. They left them alone. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was silent. Because humanity had finally cared about something. And nothing had survived it. The galaxy was silent. For the first time in history, there were no wars, no political disputes, no grand alliances shifting for power. There was only fear. The Dralzeth Empire was gone, erased so utterly that not even ruins remained. The Council, once the supreme governing force of the known universe, was shattered beyond repair. And humanity? They did not celebrate. They did not gloat. They simply left. No further transmissions. No occupation forces. No declarations of supremacy. The Terran fleets vanished into the void, retreating to their own space as if nothing had happened. For the surviving empires, this was the most terrifying outcome possible. Because it meant that humanity still didn't care. But deep within the heart of the Terran Alliance, something had changed. And the galaxy wasn't ready for what came next. The debate that could end everything. On Terra Prime, the ruling body of humanity, the Terran High Council, had convened for the first time in decades. For centuries, humanity had played the long game. They had allowed the Council to push them, allowed empires to sanction them, allowed warlords to threaten them. Because in the end it never mattered. They were patient. They were calculating. And most importantly, they knew they were better at this than anyone else. But now they stood at a crossroads. The galaxy was crippled. The survivors were weak, afraid, directionless. And for the first time, a real question was being asked among humanity's leaders. Do we take control? For centuries, the Terran Alliance had avoided empire building. They had refused to conquer, refused to expand aggressively, refused to impose their will. But now the galaxy was theirs for the taking. They could rebuild it in their image. They could crush every species that had ever tried to suppress them. They could rule. and some believe they should. The argument for domination. Admiral Kane, Supreme Commander of the Terran Fleet, was the first to speak. "We won't get another opportunity like this," he said, voice sharp. "We can secure our place at the top, permanently. We dictate the future now." Some nodded. The Zalari, the Sulvari, the remaining factions of the Council, they had all taken everything they could from humanity. Now humanity could take everything back. They could rewrite the galactic order with themselves at the center. Make sure there was never another war against them again. Make sure no species ever thought to test them again. And if they refused, then humanity would erase them just like they had erased the Dralzeth. The argument for apathy. But then another voice spoke. Not a general. Not an admiral. Not a war strategist. But a scientist. Dr. Elaine Carter, head of the Terran Scientific Initiative, leaned forward and met Admiral Kane's gaze. And she simply shook her head. "We don't need to rule them," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They already know what happens when they push us." She gestured to the screen, where data flooded in from every corner of the galaxy. The Council remnants were in chaos. The Zalari had begun reinforcing their borders, not against humanity but against each other. The Sulvari had abandoned all military operations. Entire factions were retreating to the furthest reaches of space. Because for the first time in history, there was no one left to fight. "They will never challenge us again," Dr. Carter continued. "They will not strike first. They will not come for our colonies. They won't even breathe in our direction without fear." She leaned back in her chair. "We don't need to rule them. Because we already own them." The final vote. The room fell silent. Every leader, every strategist, every commander present understood the true gravity of the moment. This was not just a choice for humanity. It was a choice for the entire future of the galaxy. They had two options. 1. Take control. Crush the remaining powers and establish themselves as the rulers of the known universe. 2. Walk away. Leave the galaxy in ruins. Let the survivors live in fear. Let the lesson of the Dralzeth be enough. The vote was held. And after a long pause, the decision was made. The last message. One final transmission was sent out. It was broadcasted to every surviving species on every network on every planet. It was simple. It was direct. And it changed everything. You are on your own. No explanation. No warning. No threats. Just a final declaration of indifference. And with that, humanity withdrew from galactic affairs completely. Their fleets vanished beyond the rim. Their colonies cut all ties with alien empires. Their diplomats never responded again. For the first time in history, the galaxy was truly alone. And the surviving species realized something far worse than conquest. They had not lost to humanity. They had been abandoned by humanity. They had been left to rot in their own ruin. And in the long silence that followed as they tried to rebuild, they finally understood. This was not mercy. This was a punishment. Because the worst thing humanity could have done was care enough to destroy them. But humanity had looked at the galaxy and simply decided. It was no longer worth the effort. Epilogue, the new galactic order. Decades passed. The old council worlds withered away. The remaining empires collapsed into infighting, unable to unify without humanity's influence. Trade collapsed. Innovation stalled. The once great civilizations became shadows of their former selves. And humanity? They never looked back. No one saw them again. No one heard from them. They had returned to the void, to their own space where no alien could reach them. They had everything they needed. They were self-sufficient. They were stronger than any empire before them. And most importantly, they were done playing.